G'day, Shah here once again with Four Wheels on the Road, helping you get the most out of your time away. I get a lot of questions and requests across my various social media platforms asking me about all the alterations that I've done to Maggie since I've had her. I've briefly touched on this in the past, but what I thought I'd do is give the videos a bit of a refresh and cover off all of the different things that we've had done since we had her. So let's go check it out. So what I'd like to do is try and start things off here in mission control, as I like to call it. I'm sure a lot of you out there would probably agree and feel the same way as I do, that this is the most important place in terms of being in the truck. You spend a lot of time here driving and you may as well be comfortable and have everything that you want really close by. To start things off, and it's something that I did, was very first up I made a list of what I wanted in terms of auto electrics on the vehicle. I was trying to think of what I know that I want now, but what I also know what I would like for the future. So what I decided to do was have an extra USB port here, so I had 3 in total. The Prado actually comes standard with just 1 USB port here and 1 in the center console. But what I've decided to do is get a bit of an upgrade to that, so that I can have 1 here running the phone up on the right hand side of myself as I'm in the driver's position. And another one, which I had at the time, had in my mind, I wanted to have a security and a driving camera, which is up here right next to the mirror. So I can have that as a security camera and also use that footage for the channel here as well, which you would have seen in videos past. And also I intended later on to get an upgrade done to the stereo, and I wanted Android or Apple CarPlay to actually be able to plug into that as well and run underneath this steering wheel here. So that was another one that I actually got put in. The next up here is in the center console. Now I apologize for the dark light, but it's a little bit of a dark day today. What I actually got put in here was an extra cigarette lighter port. So that actually runs my Garmin GPS. Now again, this is something you may not need, and in my case here you'll see that it's a little bit overkill because I actually have 2 different GPSs set up, but that's just the way I happen to like it. Now once I'd organised and put on the top of my list the USB ports plus the 12 volt cigarette port here for my Garmin, the next thing that I was thinking of in terms of other electrics was the floodlights on the front. One of the other alterations that I actually got done along the way was fitting some LED lights to the front here. I got the Bush Ranger ones. They were just, what ARB happened to have, and they mentioned that they were a pretty decent one. So what I did is I actually got 1 spotlight and 1 flooding light. And the reason that I did this is so that I can sort of cover short range with 1 light and longer range with the other one, so covering a little bit of both. The reason I had these fitted is I planned on and have already done longer range trips that are sort of in the outback, like a trip to Uluru that we've done very recently. You'll be able to see from the footage here how well these lights covered into the distance in the front. So they really do cover out to the sides pretty well and out to the front pretty well also. So they were a pretty simple alteration that was done, and they didn't cost the earth. They're only a couple $100 each now. So if you're going to use them and there's something that's going to come in handy for you, then why the hell wouldn't you, I say. I was also thinking at a later stage as well, which I probably did a couple of months after my initial setup here, was to have a compressor put in, which I have underneath my passenger seat, so that I can air down when going to the beach and going four-wheel driving, and air up again quite easily. So after we'd considered all of that as well, the next thing down on my list was having a CB set up. It's something that comes in really handy for me, especially when I'm touring around with my friends as well. We like to sort of be able to keep in contact with each other on the radio. It's something that's really handy. So far in terms of alterations, the USBs I had set up and they're running off my rear batteries, which I'll talk about in a minute. The extra cigarette lighter port also does the same thing, runs off the rear batteries. The air compressor runs off the front battery. The LED spotlights, also runs off the front battery. Now the reason that I went through the list in the way that I did as well was so that I have individual things running off individual batteries. So what I ended up getting plumbed in also at the same time was a little master switch here, just on the right hand side, just down near my knee here. And what that does is it turns the stereo on and everything that is on that little isolation switch. So the Garmin runs off that, also runs the stereo, the subwoofer, the iPad switch here. So those things can all be switched on individually. The USB ports run 24/7, and as I mentioned, they run off the rear battery, but more about that later. So we've covered quite a bit already, and we really haven't gone through too much. So as you would have also seen from videos in the past, I am running this entire rig with just the doors open, not wanting to have a trailer, so that I can just run everything as compact as I possibly can, because I really don't have any need to put people in the back of the truck, so hence the cabinetry all the way back. Another one of the things that I've actually had done in terms of 12 volt storage and 12 volt charging capacity, which runs off the two batteries that we covered earlier, is I had a 12 volt lead plugged in and plumbed in here. What I've got on here is two USBs. Now again, I thought ahead. This is where thinking about things ahead really does come in handy, and writing a list of what you want out potentially for now, for what you actually need, and also potentially for the future as well. I knew that I was going to be running a security camera, so we've got the Garmin security camera there on the back. As I mentioned, we had it on the front, so that's running from the USB here in the door. I also have a spare USB, so if I am just hanging around and want to charge my phone while I'm sitting around at the back of the truck here, because that's usually where I'm sort of sitting around and hanging around with my chair out. It's just at the back of the truck, and using my little stable table here, so I can actually charge from there as well. And I have a cigarette USB plugged in here as well, so I use that to charge my drone batteries. Now another thing that was specifically for myself, something that was actually going to come in handy, was having a 240 volt outlet. So what I've actually got done here is have a 240 volt running from my inverter in the front all the way down to the back of the truck. Quite often what I'm doing when I'm out and about is plugging the laptop in and doing some editing. So I just pull out my little stable table here and you know, chuck the laptop on it, and you know, I'm away editing on the computer, on the laptop really quickly, and it doesn't take very long at all. So again, all of these things are just up to yourself, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I've had a lot of requests from people asking me how I've got my setup done. Before I actually got my setup done, I did a lot of looking on the internet as well and checking out other people's videos and sort of, you know, thinking, oh, actually that's something I really never thought of. You know, it's something I never thought of getting done, and it's something that could be really handy for myself. So it's a good thing to check out different people's videos and check out what their setups are. Now, just on the cabinets and tables and everything, as I mentioned in the beginning also, we'll cover those sorts of things off later. I'll do a separate section on cabinets and cupboards and how I run all of my kitchen setup and all the rest of it. But as I said today, we're just really starting off with what I've done in terms of the electrics. Now, another one of the really important things that was for myself, and I've specifically had one viewer actually ask me about this, was how I had my lighting set up for camp lighting. Now, there was something very specific that I got set up with this as well, and you'll see it here. I've got an orange filter on the Nighthawk LED here. So this Nighthawk, what it does, and the way I've actually got it set up right in the middle here, it basically lights the entire back section. It lights basically from the back door here all the way around just to the rear here, which is about the width and the span of what the door opens. For me, it was something that was perfect, and you know, different things will suit different people. I only just want this particular section here lit up because all I'm doing is, you know, cooking and messing around on the computer and getting clothes out and whatever, and I can just flick a switch at the front and have that light switched on and the light on the side switched on as well in half a second, and it's super handy. This is the other light here. It's pretty much right in the middle of the roof rack, and right above this space here on the door. And again, there was a pretty big reason why I did that, is similar to the other side where I am utilizing the space with the fridge there. I actually have cabinetry in here and storage space in here, which we'll talk about later obviously, which I'm utilizing all the time. So when I'm just messing around at night time and getting stuff in and out of the fridge and whatever, there's a light in the fridge, so I really don't need a light over there. But on this side it's super handy because I don't have any lights over on this side. So just a couple of things to think about for yourself. And last but not least, in terms of things that are running off the internal battery, on one side of the back of the truck here you would have seen the 12 volt power running to and from the solar panel and Anderson plug, which lives on the roof. And on the other side here we've got the 12 volt power which runs down to my rear light here. Again, this is another thing that specifically was suited to myself because I put my bike rack on here and it has lights on it. So I wanted to make sure that I had some 12 volt power set up for that as well. So just as a recap to cover off, because we've done quite a bit today and covered quite a bit of information off, the really important thing for me to begin with, and I really think for all of you out there as well, if you're thinking about doing any kind of rewiring to your system, whether it be internal or external, because there's two different things to think about there. External, for me, what I'd got done was my air compressor underneath the passenger seat, the floodlights off the front. And internal, what I got done was added two separate batteries into the back, a battery management system, an inverter. The inverter I chose specifically because it accepts solar input and also has Anderson outputs without having to mess around too much with the electronics. I have those specifically because they match with the rooftop tent, because I could put the solar panel on the rooftop tent, and I wanted to have constant charge coming in because I wanted to run a fridge permanently. And I also had and wanted the ability to run the stereo internally, so I had the switch put in. So that's another thing to consider there as well. If you're talking about running anything in terms of lighting for your camp lighting system, and you do have a separate battery, what I got done was ran a switch that runs off the interior batteries, and I can switch it on and off at any time. So for me, what I made a priority to begin with was creating a list of things that I want, whether I wanted it, whether it was going to be necessary, or whether it was unnecessary. If you create that list to begin with, what you're doing is eliminating things that you don't need, and you can also eliminate things that the system that you've intended to set up won't actually support. I've seen a lot of people set up their systems and plumb things in and haven't really thought about voltage, haven't thought about how long the battery's going to last if they plumb all of these particular 12 volt things into their system, and they've ended up having to just spend thousands of dollars on top of what they already did because they just didn't set everything up properly in the first place. You can think a lot of the time with doing especially internal 12 volt alterations, you can think to yourself, oh yeah, look, I'm just going to get away with doing it myself and spending a couple of $100. But if you detail everything and list everything to begin with in terms of what you need now and what you're going to need in the future, and just bite the bullet and get it done properly the first time and get a particular system put in. Again, that's the reason I ended up selecting and going with my Red Arc BMS 30, was thinking about what I was going to need the whole system to run as and how I was going to be running the system in general. So think about those sorts of things before you start. Then once you've got all of that organised and you've got your list organised, then it's going to, come in terms of a budget, getting things wired in specifically into your main battery, and then a house battery if you put it internal, or external if you've got a ute or something. All of those sorts of things are going to start adding up in terms of how much money it's going to cost you, so you need to think about that as well. You may have to eliminate a couple of things off your list, but que sera, sera. You need to work out what you're going to need and how much it's going to cost. Once you've then gone through that, you can get to the point where you're going, all right, well, I'm going to get everything installed now. Now, before you even get into all of that, hey buddy. Now, before you even get into any of that as well, you need to contemplate wiring things and having particular switches for things set up separately. As we mentioned earlier, I've got my camp lighting, a separate switch. I've got my radio on a separate switch, which runs the main GPS, the external GPS unit, and also the subwoofer and stereo system. So if you want to have things like that set up, it's a really good time to do it in the beginning rather than making alterations later, because you'll end up with spaghetti of wires all over the place in your system, and it's just no good for anybody really. So you really do have a lot to consider. All right, well, I hope that's not made things too confusing for you. As I said, I really do get a lot of inquiries about this, and just from people I talk to and also across my various social media outlets asking me about this sort of thing. So I wanted to try and explain it a little bit better than I have done previously. Previously, I sort of just glossed across a couple of things and you know, tried to break it down into sections in these videos. It didn't really work. So what I've tried to do is just, as I said, now we're going to go through this week the electrics. Next time we catch up on this, we're going to go into the storage and the cabinetry I've got in the system. After that, we'll go into the rooftop tent, and I'll probably glance back and touch back on a few of the other points along the way, just to reinforce, not only for myself but also for you, all of you out there as well, why I made the decisions that I did in terms of the auto electrics along the way, in terms of the storage along the way, in terms of the rooftop tent along the way as well. Then after that, we'll cover off extra things that I've had done, like the suspension and the tyres as well. All right, well, once again, thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope I haven't gone on for too long this particular episode. It's been a bit of a long one. And we'll see you next time we get 4 wheels on the road.